Today, we're jumping headfirst into the Talmud, one of the most important texts in Jewish law. And we're going to watch as ancient rabbis wrestle with a surprisingly tricky problem. What are the rules for a holy cooking pot? We're going to see how their reasoning and their arguments unfold in a way that's, believe it or not, just as relevant to how we think today. So let's get right to it. Here is the exact puzzle that sparked this whole incredible debate. It sounds pretty simple, right? But the answer involves some really elegant theories, some sharp objections, and a surprisingly deep dive into the nature of flavor and wholeness itself. So, where do we begin? Well, our story kicks off with a foundational text called the Mishnah. You can think of it as the first clue in a 1,500-year-old detective story. It lays out the core disagreement that scholars would then debate for centuries to come. Now, it's important to know, the Mishnah isn't just a book of stories. It's more like a super condensed legal code. It often gives you the what, the ruling, but it doesn't always explain the why. And that right there is what sparks the intense debate and analysis that we're about to jump into. And right here, this is the heart of the conflict. On one side, you've got Rabbi Tarfon, who takes a pretty lenient approach. He says, look, you can use the same pot for the entire week-long festival and just give it a good cleaning once at the very end. But on the other side, you have the sages, and they argue for a much, much stricter rule. You have to scour and rinse that pot every single day. The big question, the million-dollar question really, is why would Rabbi Tarfon permit this? Isn't he worried about the flavor of yesterday's holy food, which is now forbidden as a leftover, seeping into today's meal? All right, so how did the later scholars, the ones writing in the Gemara, try to get inside Rabbi Tarfon's head? Their first move was to try and find one single, elegant principle that could explain his logic perfectly. And their first idea is, honestly, it's brilliant. They pull out a verse from Deuteronomy about the Passover festival and use it to argue that, legally speaking, the entire festival is considered one long mourning. Now, if that's true, then there's no such thing as leftover food from one day to the next. Problem solved, right? Case closed. But not so fast. Just when it seems like they have this really neat solution, another rabbi, Rav Akavadoy Bar Ami, steps in with a killer objection. He basically asks, hold on a second. If the whole festival is one long day, does that mean all the other rules about leftovers and time limits for offerings just disappear for a week? Of course not. We know those rules definitely still apply. And just like that, the first theory crumbles. It might be clever, but it creates a massive contradiction. And this is a fantastic example of how this whole process works. An explanation has to be consistent across the board. It gets stress tested, and this one just failed. So it was back to the drawing board for the sages. And this is where things get really, really creative. Since they couldn't just change the laws of time, the sages started thinking about the physics of the pot itself. And that led them to a brilliant and kind of mind-bending new theory. Okay, check this out. This new idea is fascinating. The sages propose that the pot basically cleans itself. The idea is, when you cook a fresh offering on day 2, the new, permissible food actually purges the old, leftover flavor from the pot's walls. It all gets mixed together, so you never actually eat a forbidden flavor on its own. The pot is self-purging with every use. How cool is that? And this is so typical of how these arguments work, right? You solve one problem, and boom, a new one pops up. Now that they've kind of established the pot eventually needs to be cleaned, the question becomes, how exactly do you do it? So a new Mishnah introduces another little disagreement. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says you can just use cold water for everything, scouring, rinsing, the whole deal. But the sages, they argue for a two-step process. You need hot water for the deep scouring, then cold water for rinsing. It seems like such a tiny detail, but their reasoning is what's so fascinating. The sages' argument comes down to being master detectives with the text. They point to a verse in Leviticus that says the pot should be scoured and rinsed. And they ask, why use two different words if you mean the same thing? They argue it must imply two different methods. Scoured suggests a deep, intense clean with hot water, while rinsed is a simpler action you can do with cold. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi comes right back at them with an equally clever counterargument. He says, no. If the Torah meant for you to do the same action twice, it would have said scoured and scoured. The different words just mean two different actions, one for the inside of the pot, scouring, and one for the outside, rinsing. And both of those can be done just fine with cold water. But of course, the debate doesn't stop there.
Because why would it? It gets even more complex, moving into these real-world scenarios where different types of holy food get mixed together in the very same pot.
So now we get to our final puzzle from yet another Mishnah. Imagine this, you're cooking something with a lower level of holiness, say an offering you can eat for 2 days, and you cook it with something that has a higher level of holiness that can only be eaten for 1 day. Does the stricter food's flavor make the entire dish stricter? And what on earth does that mean for cleaning the pot?
So here's how they solve it, and it's surprisingly practical. It all boils down to one simple question. Can you taste it? If the holier food actually imparts its flavor to the dish, then yep, the whole dish takes on its stricter rules and the pot needs that special cleaning. But if you can't taste it, if it doesn't impart flavor, then everything just keeps its original status. It's a solution based on a real, tangible outcome.
Okay, let's just hit pause for a second and zoom out. We've gone on quite a journey here, right? We've talked about theories of time, the physics of cooking, deep textual analysis, all spinning out from a single, simple question about a pot. So what does all of this really tell us? The real lesson here has nothing to do with ancient cookware. It's about a way of thinking, a whole framework for problem solving. It shows us that the why is so much more important than just the what. It proves that every single word matters, and that progress comes from this amazing creative process of proposing theories and then trying your absolute hardest to break them. And that really leaves us with this final thought. This ancient method of logic, of proposing, challenging, refining, and reevaluating. It's an incredibly powerful toolkit for thinking through any complex problem. It's a reminder to question our assumptions, to check for inconsistencies, and to never be afraid to look at a simple pot and see a whole universe of complex possibilities.